Hey everyone, glad you're here. Thanks for joining. This is Malta 5. My name's JD, and today we are going to pioneer to play a really unique, interesting deck. It's entirely colorless, which I think is really cool, especially for a pioneer deck. It revolves around playing a bunch of mana rocks and untapping things with Paradox Engine and generating a ton of mana and casting giant Metalwork Colossus, and there's even an infinite combo in here. So yeah, lots to kind of talk about and touch on. So I guess we'll start with that infinite combo. And that requires 3 pieces. So there's the Metalwork Colossus, you need the Witch's Oven, and you want Paradox Engine. So here's how it works. So, Metalwork Colossus, you're probably familiar with if you played some recent standards. It's a 10/10 for 11, which is quite a bit, but it costs X less to cast, where X is the total converted mana cost of non-creature artifacts you control. So, if you have a bunch of non-creature artifacts and mana rocks, this guy gets very, very cheap and potentially free. So that's the idea here, is we want to cast him for free. And we do that, the 2 most important mana rocks are Powerstone Shard, which the deck is named after. It's a 3 mana converted mana cost, and it adds 1 colorless mana for each artifact you control named Powerstone Shard. So these stack with each other. The more you get, the more powerful they are. And the other one is Hedron Archive. It's a little more expensive, but it taps for 2 colorless, and you can cash it in to draw 2 cards, should you choose to do so. Now, the cool thing about these is they kind of pull double duty in terms of reducing Metalwork's cost. They tap for colorless mana to help physically pay for him, and just by being on the battlefield, they reduce his cost because they are non-creature artifacts. So when you're using Hedron Archive to cast your Metalwork Colossus, it reduces his cost by 4 and it taps for 2. So technically, it's basically, in essence, adding 6 mana towards the cost of your Metalwork Colossus. So you just get a couple of these things out on the board, and all of a sudden he becomes free. So once you do get him free, and you also have a Paradox Engine, which also helps reduce his cost, and a Witch's Oven, you can sack the Metalwork Colossus to Witch's Oven's ability. And because his toughness is a lot more than 4, you get 2 food tokens. And then once you have those 2 food tokens, which are artifacts, you use Metalwork Colossus' second ability, which says sacrifice 2 artifacts, convenient, and you can return him from your graveyard to your hand. So you sack it to Witch's Oven, you get your food, then you sack the food, you bring Metalwork Colossus back to hand. All this time, and then you cast him again for free. And when you're casting him, you can untap all your non-land permanents you control with the Paradox Engine. So the idea is you tap everything, including your mana rocks. So you're generating some additional extra mana. And so then when you start looping the Metalwork Colossus, you are tapping all your mana rocks each time to generate more and more and more mana. So this becomes an infinite loop, all the while you're generating a ton of mana, and eventually the end goal is to find your Walking Ballista and kill the opponent. Whew. So that's the main infinite combo. You can't go infinite necessarily, but you can almost go infinite with Mystic Forge. And this does not require, like, the Witch's Oven. It doesn't require those pieces necessarily. But with Mystic Forge, you can now look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast artifact spells and colorless spells from the top of your library, which is literally every single card in the deck, with the exception of lands. Lands do not count. So the only thing that screws us up is lands, but otherwise we can cast everything off the top of our deck. Luckily, Mystic Forge lets you pay 1 life, tap to exile the top card. So if you do hit a land, you can tap it, get rid of the land, and then hopefully cast the next card. And so in this way, You're just casting stuff off the top of your deck, untapping everything with Paradox Engine every time you do that, tapping all your mana rocks, generating a ton of mana so you can just keep casting everything. And when you're casting these cheap spells like Inquisitive Puppets or whatever, you're just netting extra mana every time. And so you're going to be able to keep casting bigger and bigger spells. And eventually, if you find your Walking Ballista, you can do the same thing. You can cast a massive Walking Ballista or whatever. It's just not an infinite deterministic combo. But just a really, really strong interaction and synergy. So let's talk about everything else. So we mentioned Walking Ballista is kind of the kill condition. I mean, in addition to just beating down with Metalwork Colossi, that is definitely an option. A 10/10 is nothing to sneeze at. So that one way to win is just kill them with Metalwork Colossus, which does work. The other way would be the Walking Ballista. So let's see. So to get the Walking Ballista, if you want to win that way, there are two things we can do. Included in the mana base is Inventor's Fair, which you can pay for and tap it to sack it and tutor up an artifact card from your deck. So you can use Inventor's Fair to find your Ballista if you don't naturally draw it. You can also use Karn, the Great Creator, to fetch the other Singleton Walking Ballista out of your sideboard. So Karn or Inventor's Fair will find that Ballista. And speaking of Karn, well, Inventor's Fair will also find you the Singleton Witch's Oven in your deck. Karn will find you the Singleton Witch's Oven in your sideboard. So both of these pieces search things out. We've got Singletons in the deck for Inventor's Fair and Singletons in the sideboard for Karn. So hopefully we're finding our pieces fairly consistently. Also in the sideboard, a bunch of other Singletons for Karn. Meteor Golem to destroy permanents. Orbs of Warding for like burn type decks, aggro decks, Aligned Hedron Network to get rid of big giant scary stuff. Filigree Familiar helps gain some life against aggressive decks. Sorcerer Spyglass shuts down activated abilities. Planeswalkers and whatnot. Ratchet Bomb takes care of tokens. Because we do have Blast Zone, which takes care of other small, like low converted mana cost things, but it enters with one already on it, so it can't destroy 0 converted mana cost things. So that's where Ratchet Bomb comes in. I can wipe out tokens. Let's see, Sentinel Totem for Graveyard Hate, Spatial Contortion for some removal. Karn cannot fetch this. That's why I have 4 of them, because it cannot be tutored with Karn. So if we are in a situation where we want to sideboard this in, we can't rely on Karn finding additional copies. We probably just want to jam in more copies to make sure that we find it. Anyway, that's a sideboard. Let's just run through it, the rest of it. Starting with the mana base, we talked about Inventor's Fair. Lets you tutor for missing pieces. Obviously really good in an artifact deck. It gains you life if you have 3 or more, which we certainly will. The cool thing about the mana base is because we have no colors, it allows us to run all these really interesting utility lands that a lot of decks can't afford to run a ton of because they have to make their colors. We don't have to make any colors, so we can run all kinds of weird lands. Let's see. So I mentioned Blast Zone briefly. This, you can put some mana into it, up the charge counters, and destroy every non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters. So it's a way for us to wipe the board of like a bunch of little aggro weenie creatures or whatever it might be. So some built-in removal there. Field of Ruin is land hate. Just the one of them. And to go along with that one Field of Ruin, we have a Singleton Waste, so we can search that up when we activate Field, and we don't just screw ourselves. It's also good if if we get hit with an Ass Trophy, we have at least one basic land we can fetch up. So we get a Singleton Waste in there. Radiant Fountain gains you 2 life when it enters, which is great because we're kind of slow. So the extra life against aggro decks buys us some time to start doing our thing. So we've got 4 Radiant Fountains. Sanctum of Ugin is another 4 of. This allows us to chain together Metalwork Colossus. Whenever you cast a spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, you may sack it, and if you do, search for a colorless creature card, put it into your hand, blah, blah, blah. So if we have this out, we cast a Metalwork Colossus with it, we can sack it, patch out another Metalwork Colossus, hopefully cast that, and we can chain together just 4 in a row and slam them with an army of Colossi. So Sanctum is really good. Seagate Wreckage is a 2 of. If we have nothing else going on, we can, and no cards in hand, we can put some mana into this and draw a card. So it's a good utility land, definitely helpful. And finally, Zhalfirin Void. This, when it enters the battlefield, scries 1. So again, it kind of helps us, keeps us from stumbling, especially in the early game. When we're trying to get up to the maximum amount of mana as fast as possible so we can start going off. This helps us clear the way of unwanted cards. So Zhalfirin Void is really good. The Scry is also good in combination with the Mystic Forge, because again, we can't, if we hit a land on the top of our library, that stops the chain. We can't cast lands off the top using Mystic Forge. So we could, if we have a Zhalfirin Void, the Scry, we could play that as our land for turn and scry away a second land on top of the deck. So hopefully we can continue casting things. So the Scry is good. Inquisitive Puppet has a similar effect. When it enters the battlefield, it scries. So again, helps clear the top of the deck for the Mystic Forge. It's also a good blocker. It comes down early. It's a 1-drop. It's an 0/2. You can block and then exile it and create a 1/1 so you can block again. So it does a really good job on defense, just chump blocking. We talked about Witch's Oven. I have a Singleton Crashing Drawbridge because, like I mentioned, sometimes you just want to win with Metalwork Colossi. You just want to smash in with 10/10s. The thing is, they don't have haste, so sometimes you need to win right now. And if you're chaining through your deck, or you have an Inventor's Fair, or you can tutor this out that way. But if you have one of these out, you can tap it and then give all of a sudden those 4 Metalwork Colossus that just dropped. Now they're attacking immediately, and that's kind of scary. So I thought that was worth including at least one. Hedron Crawler is bad. It's an 0/1 for 2, but it does tap for mana, and it's a 2-drop that jumps us up to 4 mana the next turn, which is what we need for like Hedron Archive, Powerstone Shard, Mystic Forge. It does help us ramp. It's not a great card, but it does help us ramp in the early turns. So I decided to include it. Unfortunately, because it's a creature, it does not count towards Metalwork Colossus's cost reduction because he specifies non-creature artifacts. So it's a non-bow there, but it does ramp us quicker, and so I think it's worth it. The Shard and the Archive we already talked about. Karn is a tutor piece. Mystic Forge we talked about. Paradox Engine. Then we have Ugins, because why not? Colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. That's amazing. That just reduces the cost of everything. Helps us cast our Metalwork Colossus, helps us chain through our deck when we're going crazy with Mystic Forge. And his plus ability, again, helps clear the way, the top card of the library, if we do hit a land on Mystic Forge. So that's yet another way to do that. And it can destroy permanents. That's 1 or more colors. So removal on a stick this just kind of does a little bit of everything that we want it to do. So Ugin's great, only 6 mana, which isn't too terrible. Then we've got Big Ugin. And hopefully you're familiar with this card. This card's amazing. It's a little more expensive. So I only get 2 of them, but does 3 damage to anything you want. It can wipe the board of colored permanents. He's just really, really strong card. And then the Colossus and the Blister we talked about. Sideboard we talked about. So that's pretty much it. Definitely a lot of moving parts. And if you've seen me play before, you know I'm a filthy, filthy casual, and I punt a lot, and So hopefully, I'm sure I'm going to miss things and interactions, and hopefully I don't screw it up too bad, but it's definitely seems like a really, really fun deck. I'm excited to try out. Some maybe notable omissions that I could have included are things like Golden Egg, that cantrips. When you cast that, you get to draw a card, which is nice. You can also cash it in for some life, but it doesn't. And it does count towards Metalwork Colossus as a non-creature, but I felt like at the 2-drop slot, I wanted Hedron Crawler to ramp us a little faster. The card draw is nice, but I felt like maybe Hedron Crawler is I don't know. So Golden Egg is definitely something I could have included instead. Same with Treasure Map. But Treasure Map, it scries. I feel like we already have enough of that scry effect between the Puppet, the Void, Ugin. We can kind of clear the top of our deck for Mystic Forge that way, that it didn't necessarily need the Treasure Map, and it takes a few activations before it flips, so meh. Same with Karn, Scion of Urza. You can exile cards from the top of your life. I feel like we have enough of that effect. I'd rather have an Ugin or Karn the Great Creator if I'm going to be casting a more expensive Planeswalker. Pyramid of the Pantheon is something I considered as well. It's a 1-drop, which is nice because we don't have a ton going on in the early turns. We're really slow. It takes us a few turns to get going. So, Pyramid of the Pantheon is a 1-drop that we can play on turn 1 and then start pumping some mana, activating it in the early turns. And then hopefully by the time we get to turn 4 or 5, it's a really strong mana rock and it's tapping for a lot. But it does require 3 activations, and that's not nothing. There is other stuff we do want to be doing in the early turns, a Hedron Crawler, a Powerstone Shard. If we had literally nothing going on until maybe turn 4, then I feel like Pyramid would be a little better. As it stands now, I think it's just too much work to get it to where you want it to be. And then there's definitely plenty of options of other lands I could have included. Like Mutavault, for example, is a great colorless utility land. And that can play defense in the early turns. It could be a blocker. It can get aggressive. But I just felt like it's not exactly what we want to be doing. I'd rather just gain the extra life from Radiant Fountain to help us pad us against aggro decks. I'd rather have the card draw option with Seagate Wreckage. Could have also included things like Scavenger Grounds, which is graveyard hate, but we have the singled in Sentinel Totem we can just tutor out if we really need graveyard hate. I didn't think having a random one of in the mana base was even worth it, because what are the odds we're even going to draw it if we need it? It's nice. You kind of want to include just a huge array of all these colorless, cool utility lands, because you can. You could do a little bit of everything and cover your bases, but I'd rather just load up on the ones that I really want, like Inventor's Fair, the Void, Radiant Fountain, Sanctum of Ugin, and have a singleton of a couple others and do it that way. Just really go all in on the strongest ones and just omit completely the more weak options. So I don't know. There's definitely tweaks I could make, different cards I could play. I would love to hear if anybody else is playing this deck, what suggestions they might have for card choices. Like I said, there were plenty of other cards I considered. Even some of the numbers I'm at, like you could tweak these numbers a little bit and, only have 2 Ugin the Ineffables and 1 Ugin the Spirit Dragon, 3 Hedron Archive. You could take a few things down, pump a few things up. Maybe I go a 2-2 split on the Hedron Crawler and the Golden Egg. You get the idea. Point is, there's a lot you can do, and this is by no means an ideal tuned list per se, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to get it there. So anyway, looking forward to the gameplay. We're going to take this through a league. Please subscribe if you haven't yet, if you like this channel and what we do here. It definitely helps us out, so we would appreciate it. But yeah, thanks for watching. See you in the matches.